Hello, Knights of the Realm. Eric from Dead Tech here, and today I am recording in a castle, as it turns out. So you may notice a few different changes here. I have a lapel mic instead of the thing you usually see, and you can't see this, but you are actually in a halo of light that makes me think that I might be dying and like moving towards heaven, but it is a ring light that my wife got me, which is pretty cool. So maybe I can actually start to have production quality like a grown-up YouTuber. I'm not promising that. So what am I doing here? I am in a castle, as it turns out. It has a hearth, I believe we call it. There is a lake, which I am 90% sure there's a magic sword at the bottom of. So, you know, good times all around. In all seriousness, maybe I'll get some footage of this, but we are in a B&B that is called the Castle in the Country in Allegan, Michigan. I bought my wife a vacation, a 2-day vacation for her birthday, a getaway to do nothing but like read and eat good food and sit by the fire in this room and watch TV and naturally make reader question roundup videos, because that's just what I do in my spare time. Speaking of reader questions, let's do that. I've got a couple reader questions that are about basically how to learn and grow and become a developer, and then I've got one that's about the practicalities of incorporating and where and how to do that, and then a third one that is, and then I've got a fourth one that is about an interesting kind of development in New Jersey that happened at the beginning of the pandemic vis-a-vis their employment administration system and Cobol. It'll be fun. We'll dive into that. So if any of that sounds interesting and, you know, or maybe you just like being in a castle, stay tuned. All right, I haven't yet figured out a great system for this, so I've just got a laptop up here that I'm reading these off of. This first one is actually something someone sent in and asked me like 8 questions or something. I can't really see exactly how many are on there. I'm not going to tackle all of them at once, but I'm going to kind of group them and do a couple in this video and maybe string them out over some other videos. So let me pop this open, and the 2 questions that I'm going to answer here and kind of roll into one are, do you use a specific productivity system and workflow when you are watching a course or reading a book? And do you take notes as you watch/read or finish a chapter module and then start practicing or reviewing? And this is all told against the backdrop of somebody who is looking to, I believe it was a chemical engineer job, looking to leave that and become a software engineer. And I'm imagining doing this via, it doesn't say specifically here, but probably self-instruction. So how do you go about learning and internalizing, you know, these video courses or whatever they may be is the question. So to answer this, what do I personally do? I don't really know. It's been kind of a while since I did this sort of autodidact style of learning a tech or anything like that. But I'll digress a little bit here and say that as I understand it, and I might just be making this up because it's so far in the past, but I think there are kind of like 3 main modes of learning, 3 different ways that people have learning strength. Some people read really well by, or learn really well by reading, others by hearing, like auditory, you know, like watching a talk or something, and a third group of people learn by doing.
Morning! Now, full disclosure, most of my experience is putting babies in women.
Oh, I'm gonna kill that man.
You just described my morning.
So let me offer the caveat that it really probably depends which you are, not what I am. I personally am a big-time learner by doing, so it's getting a little while in my past, maybe 5 years ago, that I was doing something like watching a course on Pluralsight and learning how to use some kind of framework. But as best I can recall, in doing something like that, I personally would watch the video, or it could be reading. It wouldn't matter too much which, but I would watch the video or read, and then I would immediately want to go and apply that to something kind of practical, because I retain information fine if I hear it or read it, but I don't grok it in quite the same way, because I struggle if I don't have a practical application for information. Personally, when I don't have a practical application, it's basically just trivia, which is sort of passingly interesting, but I don't grok it in the same way that I do if I'm reading about like how to get going with a, you know, logging framework or something, and then I actually implement it and I have an actual problem to solve because I'm trying to actually put log information in a file so that I can debug something. In that scenario, I find the information very useful, practically applicable in the immediate sense, and then I grok and internalize quite well. If, on the other hand, I'm just reading about it and not doing anything with it, I'll probably remember really well, like the name of the logger and some salient information about it, but I won't have that kind of muscle memory. But that's just me, and maybe that's you. I would try it. I think that for learning new text that you really need applied lessons personally, but I don't know. So I guess the question in the truest sense was, what do I do? And I've answered that, but like, I don't really want to get into the business of telling you how you should learn. All right. Question 2 here. Sorry, I'm struggling with this a little bit because the ring light around the phone that is recording is like super bright. So I have kind of a halo vision thing going here and it makes me look like I'm blind, but I'm not. I am not sure what to learn to become a well-rounded developer. Should I create a roadmap from web development to machine learning / AI and software development skill? So to answer this question in the literal sense, should you create a roadmap to learn web development, AI development, and software development in general? No, that's not how I would break into programming. That's a lot of very broad stuff. And I don't know that all of that lumped together is going to be useful to you in any way. I would also work back and ask, why well-rounded? I mean, like, that sounds like a nice thing, but if you are a chemical engineer and you want to become a software engineer, I would actually think that the path to doing that is to probably create a specific kind of narrow entree into programming, like learning web development and not AI or all this other stuff. Just learn how to do web development in Rails or whatever boot camp or something that you're doing, and then try to get a job doing that, because that will make you a programmer. And then if you want, as you pursue your programming career, you could become well-rounded, do a variety of different things. Now, as longtime watchers of this channel will know, readers of my blog will know, I'm not really a huge advocate of generalizing, so I don't really know why you would want to kind of get a whole bunch of different kind of programming things together, put them all together, and do that. I'm not saying it's wrong. If your goal is to have like a 40-year career as a programmer where you bounce around from thing to thing and just kind of are a dilettante in the space, like, sure, become well-rounded. I mean, frankly, I kind of did that. So for what it's worth, when I graduated college, I had a theoretical CS degree that I got, a computer science degree, and my first job, the very first things that I did was like C and C++ programming. So I did a lot of like kernel programming, like real low-level stuff. And then at that job, there were a lot of different things going on. So in sort of opportunistic fashion, just because this is what was needed in the department, I did some Java-based web development after that. I pitched in on some projects that were in like Visual Basic and Windows technologies at the time. Some of this was early web development. So I wound up becoming a well-rounded software engineer. I think that served me in terms of being able to go to different jobs with different tech stacks and get up to speed quickly and sort of move around among different technologies. It helped me be a programmer that could learn different technologies really quickly. So all of that sounds like a success story for, yeah, go seek out how to become a well-rounded programmer. But in retrospect, looking back on my career, I don't know how actually valuable all that was. I don't know that it wouldn't have been more valuable to me to advance my career by staying focused on something like kernel programming or device programming, getting really good at that, becoming specialized in it, and either building a practice if I were in business for myself, or maybe like kind of lucrative, in-demand technologies that I could work my way into over the course of time, which we'll get to in one of the later reader questions, is these sort of like really specialized techs. So I guess I'd ask, why are you trying to become a really well-rounded programmer? Like, why is that even the goal in the first place? And if there's a good answer for it, like if you just want variety throughout the course of your career and you want to learn a lot of different languages and paradigms so that you've got like a deep theoretical knowledge base to serve you in that career, then great. And if that's the case, what I would suggest is the thing I suggested at the beginning: go do something narrow to get into the field. focus on web development, like a specific kind of web development, get that job, learn it, get good at it, and then start to dig a little bit more broadly into the underpinnings of that knowledge. So when you're doing web development, you're going to be writing a bunch of maybe client-side code in JavaScript, or maybe you're doing the server-side code in Rails, whatever it may be. Start to look at like, well, okay, I'm writing this code that gets executed on the server, but like, what is a web server? How does that work? You know, how would one write a web server? So if you go layers of abstraction below the code where you're currently working, and you start to think like, how do web servers work? Or even below that, how do operating systems work? That's a good way to become well-rounded and to get sort of a deep theoretical knowledge base. I guess another one would be to once you're pretty good at a language or tech stack, jump into another one, and then you start to see the language, syntax, and semantic differences. You start to learn how different problems are solved in different tech stacks. All of that would lead you to becoming a well-rounded programmer. But I wouldn't accept it as just like axiomatic that you want to be a well-rounded programmer. I would lay out a more specific career path with more specific goals before you start to ask questions like that. Because what you might do is just get on a career trajectory of becoming a well-rounded programmer where you're just on this never-ending treadmill of technologies that every 2 years you have to learn the latest thing because you're competing with people half your age and half your salary who have learned that stuff and are willing to put in nights and weekends, and you're just trying to keep up. So be careful with the idea of becoming a well-rounded programmer. Do that with intention if you're going to do it. Question 3 here, fighting through my blindness. I set up a North Carolina LLC recently, but have not gotten an EIN yet. Business checking and credit accounts on the way. I'm doing a 3-month gig in Europe and getting paid in US dollars. No European taxes. Hooray. That's good stuff. You don't want to pay that. But my business was not conducted in North Carolina, so for this reason, is there anything stopping me from making a Delaware/Texas/Nevada/Wyoming LLC right now and dismantling the North Carolina LLC so this way I can avoid more state income taxes? Okay, interesting question. So I'm going to make a few assumptions here. One is that you mentioned you've set up this LLC in North Carolina, and you've done some business but haven't been paid for it yet. So the question is, when you're paid for it, do you run it through the North Carolina LLC? Maybe you're thinking about just having it sent to your personal checking account, or can or should you set up an LLC in a different state other than the one in which you reside? So under that assumption, I'm going to answer the question. I'm also going to clarify a few things here based on the question for anybody watching. EIN stands for Employer Identification Number, and that is basically the equivalent of your business's social security number. So when you incorporate, one of the things that you'll do is you will go to the IRS, this is if you're US based, and you will register your incorporated business. You incorporate with the state, but then you go to the IRS, the federal agency, and you say, hey, I have this business that I've incorporated. Can you give me an employer identification number for it? And from then on, that is the thing that you use to have the IRS identify your business. So that's what he means when he's asking about an EIN. So with that in mind, the question is, you have a North Carolina LLC, which means for anybody watching, he has paid the incorporation fee in North Carolina. I've gotten everything set up, but that's not a real high commitment thing. You could always incorporate a business. The fee varies by state from probably like $10 to incorporate in some states all the way on up to, I imagine it's like, $450,000 in California.
We're trying to change the world out there in California.
In all seriousness, it's pretty expensive there, I think. That varies, but beyond that initial startup fee, there's not a lot of commitment. Like you could just, for however much money, go spin up like 5 LLCs if you wanted. It actually doesn't take very long. To see if I can dig up a video of me actually doing this once. You can literally watch me do this for hit subscribe. So anyway, there are some interesting things going on here when you think about where to incorporate. So you have a North Carolina LLC, and I am assuming that you are physically based in North Carolina, notwithstanding going to Europe to do a gig or something, that your home address is in North Carolina. So the question is, should you run through this North Carolina business that you've already created, or do you maybe go to a state with no income tax like Texas or Florida and incorporate there, or do you go to somewhere like Delaware? So let me, for the sake of anyone who's watching this that maybe doesn't know the things I'm assuming you know, explain a little bit about the reason sometimes people want to incorporate in different states. Delaware is a big one. They have something there that's called their Chancery Court, and that is known as a state in which you might want to incorporate. Now, a lot of people don't know it's because of this Chancery Court, which is basically a court that gives businesses a lot of rights in terms of certain aspects of the legal process. I'm not going to get into it too far because don't incorporate in Delaware. It doesn't matter. Don't do that. The reason you would want to do that is if you were forming a C Corp, which you might be doing if you had an LLC where you were looking to go public, or you were looking to create a certain tax structure that I also won't go into here. But the long and short of it is Delaware is where people who are like startup founders that have built a business and they want to go from an LLC to a C Corp to maybe go public or to get venture capital, often they'll go to Delaware, and that's because you can get a lot of things expedited. If you are looking to incorporate in order to have like your consulting practice, forget Delaware. It doesn't matter. As for other states, whether you should go there to get zero income tax, that is always theoretically something you might consider, but I'm going to kind of burst your bubble there from most of that. If you form an LLC, that is what is known as a pass-through tax entity. So the fact that you're incorporated in Delaware with the LLC, what the IRS looks at that LLC as is kind of nothing. It's just this entity through which money flows, and you pay taxes through your LLC only on your personal income returns. So the IRS isn't going to care for state income tax purposes, whether that LLC is in North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, whatever, because they're only interested in computing your, I should say, from a federal perspective, your federal tax rate won't be affected, obviously, by what state you're in, but also your state income tax rate, like your state's collaboration with the IRS or state tax, same deal. So you are paying income tax in your state based on the state of which you are a resident, not the state in which you are incorporated. So if you were to incorporate an LLC in Texas and you were to receive income through that Texas LLC, and you were to take money out of it into your bank account based in North Carolina, when you report tax at the year end and you file your income tax returns, the IRS does not care where that business is based. They care that you are based in North Carolina, so you will pay North Carolina state income tax no matter what. So from a state income tax perspective, doesn't matter at all with an LLC where you're incorporated. That could be different if you were forming a C Corp, but I'm guessing you're probably not going to do that, and I wouldn't suggest doing it even if you were thinking of it, so don't worry about that. So we're kind of undercutting the core reasons that you might want to incorporate in another state, and I'm going to go ahead and do that even a little bit more, which is to incorporate in another state that you don't reside in, you need to go and get and hire something called a registered agent.
As you can see, we've had our eye on you for some time now, Mr. Anderson.
And a registered agent is basically just a person who receives mail in a state. But businesses want to be able to send mail to companies that are incorporated in those states. Basically, what a state is saying when you form a business in that state is, we need somebody that is locally based in this state with whom we can deal from a legal perspective. We're going to send you information about your filing fees, any legal things, if you were to start running payrolls, like Department of Labor type stuff. All of that needs to go to somewhere in our state. And so what the states want is that you have somebody there receiving that mail on your behalf. Now, you could get away with doing something like I have a service, I'll put a link in the show notes, or what do you call it, on the description. You could get away with a service like I had that is Traveling Mailbox was the old one. I have one called Post-Scan Mail that we use now. If you're going to get one of those, get Post-Scan Mail, much better. But they basically receive mail on your behalf and forward it or shred it or do certain things with it. You could get away with using that as kind of a registered agent. The state probably wouldn't like it. They might make some noise about it if they found out. So generally, the wisdom is that there are people who will do that on your behalf, serve as registered agents for a fee. And so understand everything we're talking about here. For the sake of you maybe wanting to incorporate in a different state, you're getting no state income tax savings, no Fed savings. There's probably no real advantage to something like Delaware's Chancery Court unless you really intend to go there and do some legal maneuvering, like suing people or something. And then there's also this fee that you would incur to reside in another state as a business entity. The only real upside might be that North Carolina's incorporation and annual fee is $100, and maybe you go to Michigan, where I am, where I think it's $50 or $25. So you can save a little money that way, but then you're incurring all of this confusing overhead to have an LLC in another state. So all of this is to say that my unequivocal advice to any of you out there building an LLC is, unless you have some super strong reason to do otherwise, like a lawyer is telling you to or something, incorporate in the state where you live. Much easier, much less headache, and there's just not a lot of upside until you have much more sophisticated business interests to incorporate somewhere other than where you live. All right, let's do one last question here. And this is from somebody, I think you sent this through LinkedIn. It says, "Hi, Eric. I just came across this Hacker News post about tech-related woes relating to New Jersey's administering unemployment benefits. This seems to be a textbook example of developers ending up at the bottom of the political pile within an organization, as you have observed in Developer Hegemony." My book, link in the description if you want. Perhaps it would be worth time to write a blog post about this scenario. When I go to this, it takes you to a Hacker News thing, which in turn takes you to a tweet. And that tweet says, "The governor of New Jersey just put out the call on live TV that he's desperate for Cobol programmers right now." Okay, so to kind of recap a little here what's going on. Apparently, right at the beginning-ish of the pandemic, in March or April of 2020, that's about when I'm running a backlog on from answering these questions, everybody in the U.S. became unemployed, give or take. And so New Jersey apparently has a COBOL-based, mainframe type system for administering unemployment benefits.
Check the computer.
The mainframe computer. I access the mainframe.
Check the computer.
The mainframe computer.
God damn it, you're in the mainframe.
And as the tidal wave of unemployment claims were about to hit, apparently they needed some COBOL programmers to roll up their sleeves, come out of retirement, get in there and help. So how does this relate to my book, Developer Hegemony? And what do I think of this situation? So I talk a lot about how in Developer Hegemony, how salaried employment is kind of a bad economic deal in a few different ways for engineers, and how engineers wind up at the bottom of organizations with lots and lots of management on top of them. And I don't think this is particularly good for engineers or for anyone to really get things done. I go into a lot of detail about things like that. That said, I'm not sure this is a great example of sort of the subordinacy of the developer in the organization. I think this is a bit of a different thing. So what you've got here is, not surprisingly, a state government that has really, really old technology, and they probably have this increasingly, I've actually literally consulted with a state government in this exact situation, where you have these folks that have been administering these systems for 30 years or more, and every year they're about to retire, and every year begging them not to retire and keep working into their 70s and paying them more and more money is somehow cheaper than anything else you might do. So do these particular engineers, these folks that are in their 70s or whatever, aging out of the workforce but keep getting drawn back in with good pay with the state government, are they at the bottom of the pile? Well, kind of, but they probably have some golden handcuffs. It's not the arrangement I personally would seek out, but it's not a bad one. And they actually have a good bit of leverage. And when something goes wrong in that situation, and there are not a lot of folks out there in the broader world that can come in and fill needs as they spike, like would be the case with needing a lot of work on one of these old mainframe systems. That can be a lot of leverage either for employed people or free agents out there. And so think back to the first question where I was talking about whether it's good to be a generalist or not. And a lot of people would say, oh, you don't want to get stuck in the trap of being a Cobol programmer. Well, I don't know. Those folks in New Jersey who really needed help probably would have been willing to pay $250, $300 an hour over the short term to get that help that's in there. So generalizing to the situation of a bureaucratic institution, like a government or like a bank or manufacturing company with a lot of really, really legacy stuff that has this kind of like endless relationship with a handful of individual contributors that kind of prop it all up. I don't think that's the healthiest relationship out there for anybody, but I think it's a much bigger problem for the company to depend on something like that, where it's easy to be held hostage by individual contributors than it is for those individual contributors who can kind of name their salary and name their demands in periods of high leverage. I don't know that I would bank on that as a long-term strategy as one of those individual contributors. I don't know how high up Maslow's hierarchy you're getting with that role, but I don't think it's the worst thing, and I don't think it's the most disenfranchising thing that happens in the corporation. Where I think things like that come to play vis-a-vis developer hegemony is when you have a lot of super replaceable, kind of fungible developer resources.
Or one of your drones from Sector 7G.
And you see that much less in people with very specialized knowledge like Cobol or Fortran or something. And you see it much more in somebody who is kind of a dilettante, like a Java programmer, but then that became less of a thing. So maybe you moved over to doing Python, but now everybody's doing JavaScript. So when you become a general programmer that just kind of is decent in every tech stack out there, it doesn't have a lot of domain expertise, you're just a hired gun that can write code and sort of float around between languages, that's a much more bottom of the pile type thing where there's a lot of pressure on you from people with a deeper tech specialization, where the organization can say, well, why do I want somebody with 2 years of JavaScript when I can get somebody with 10 for the same price? And it also comes to bear when your background just kind of miscellaneously looks like everybody else's background, except people with half of your years of experience cost half as much. Those are the dangerous scenarios. That's when there's a lot of downward pressure on you and you're sort of imminently replaceable. And that's the frankly depressing situation in which a lot of people in large corporate enterprises find themselves. So I guess I would say worry not for those Cobol programmers, either as individual contributors or as hired guns. I'd worry more for the miscellaneous kind of T-shaped or purely generalist developer out there that's perpetually in danger of being replaced by somebody with a little bit less experience. So hopefully that answers the question. That's my take on that anyway.
Thank you for watching that reader question roundup. I do appreciate you tuning into these videos. If you would like to ask a reader question, you can do so at deadtech.com/ask. I will also have a link to that down in the description, so you can go there right from this page. If you like this video, it would be great if you could give me a like. It's not just fluff, it actually does help the channel. And if you liked it enough that you want to subscribe, I encourage you to do so. If you're going to do that, maybe click the bell down below, because that will give you an email each time a new video is posted to the channel. And I'll say what I have always said, which is that if you don't like, feel free to give it a thumbs down. I am looking for feedback in whatever form it comes, whether it's comments, likes, dislikes, however you want to engage is, of course, your business. So with that, I will say thanks again for watching, and I will catch you next time.